Keeping safety front of mind is all about communication. Welcome to the Farm Safety Roundup, a podcast series focused on important conversations to help keep farmers, their families, and their workers safe. Farm Safety Roundup is brought to you by the agricultural team at Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. With today's timely topic, I'm your host, Shaun Haney. Let's get to it. It's now time for another edition of the Farm Safety Roundup. And, as a health and safety consultant, today's guest, Ryan Dick, wants to get others thinking about what is truly important at the end of the day when it comes to farm safety. So just some background on our guest. Ryan was raised on the family farm and continues that tradition today, still farming. He knows from experience the best time to deal with an emergency situation on the farm is actually being proactive before it happens. So no matter what the risks in your area, you can take precautions now to safeguard your animals, your property, and also your business, which is an important factor as well. So let's bring him in. It is Ryan Dick. Hey, Ryan, how's it going?
Not too bad, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it is great to chat with you here today. So Ryan, how do you assess the risks on your farm or another farm that you're working with?
One of the first things you have to do is do a walk around, actually, take a good look at all those places on the farm, examine the field entrances, your farm entrances, examine the barn itself. You need to understand how your surrounding environment plays a factor into that as well. We've had a lot more forest fires and other seasonal weather changes over the last few years that have really taken a lot of us by surprise. So understanding those changing weather patterns in your area are also a key importance on assessing those risks on the farm. You've got to make sure that you're minimizing those risks in the barn, especially for the winter. You want to keep things clear, snow accumulation. You want to watch out for your heat lamps. Ammonia buildup in barns is pretty important as well. You need to be aware of that happening, make sure the proper ventilation is there. Essentially, you need to be looking at what are you going to do in case of an emergency. You don't want to leave that to the chances of it happening and then trying to figure out what you want to be doing. You want to have a good plan in place as far as assessing what you're going to do if a barn fire happens.
Yeah. And I was just going to mention to you, like, the part of that proactive part that I was talking about is having that tillage equipment kind of still hooked up around the barn in case there is some sort of fire, right?
That has, in our neck of the woods, that has proven very effective a couple of times. I unfortunately had a situation on my farm this past year, and it was because the neighbors have tillage equipment hooked on at all times that they were actually able to come out and deal with the situation that arose in our field. If you don't have something hooked up, no matter how accessible it is, it's still going to take you a good 20 minutes, half hour to get that tractor fired up, hooked onto the equipment, and then out. And in a half hour, a barn fire or a field fire can spread extremely far.
Oh, man. Okay, so let's talk about identifying some of the hazard gaps on the farm to reduce the potential impact here if something goes wrong.
Well, one of the biggest things that needs to be assessed is your civic address. Is it visible? Is it clear? Will people be able to see it from the roadway, or is it covered by brush? Did maybe the cultivator hit that last time it was coming in? Can first responders get in? Do they know where the location is? One of the biggest problems that we've seen is that first responders, they will go to the civic address number. And if that civic address number is at the driveway, but the issue is in the back 40 or is in the barn around the back of the farm, those first responders are going to waste precious minutes at the house trying to find somebody. So it's very important to have that plan in place, have someone meet those first responders at the end of the road and direct them to exactly where they need to go. It's also very important to have those access lanes clear and open at all times, especially as we move into the winter. Snow accumulation, we've gotten as much as 2 or 3 feet of snow at a time here. And I've yet to find the fire truck or ambulance that's going to be able to get through that to the back farm if needed. So making sure you're keeping those lanes clean and open, well sanded with a good base is extremely important to allow access when needed. And you can also make sure that your local fire departments are properly trained. You can ask, have they had any specific training on confined space or grain rescue? We're going into the fall, winter months. A lot of grain dryers are going to be running full bore now. It's very important to know what experiences your local departments have to deal with those. And when's the last time you reviewed the insurance policies? Costs of building materials have skyrocketed over the last few years. And unfortunately, a few years back when we had those windstorms, there's a lot of barns damaged. And unfortunately, at the time, everybody thought they were covered. But when the dust settled and the insurance companies were done, the payouts, the replacement costs on a lot of those older buildings were far below the costs of even putting in a new cement pad for the replacement building. Those costs are extremely difficult to be absorbed.
You know, Ryan, you mentioned the local fire department, them being trained. I've heard of some farms, even on top of that, taking some members of the local fire department on a tour of the farm.
And that is a great idea, Shaun. And if you haven't had the fire department on site, I definitely urge you to reach out and contact them. One of the greatest things is having the fire chief or those first responders familiar with your farm. There's a lot of hazards they need to be aware of: pesticide storage, fuel storage, where water lines are, where the power access points are. All very important for them to know. And if they're showing up at 3 o'clock in the morning and everything is pitch black and there's no power, it's extremely difficult for them to figure out where they need to be going to serve you best. Have them on farm during the day, give them a tour. Consider doing it multiple times in the year. Our local fire chief has been great at that, and has practiced several of the farmers do on a regular basis, especially in the spring and the fall if they are storing excessive chemicals and products over the course of the season.
So when it comes to having an emergency plan, what does that actually look like? Because it just shouldn't be like, call the fire department. That's way oversimplistic here. That's obviously a component of it. But what is in an emergency plan for a farm?
Well, an emergency farm, you're going to want to have roles well defined. You're going to want to know those emergency numbers beyond just the standard 911. Have numbers for your local neighbors easily accessible. They're the first ones to be able to respond to give you a hand. Know where all your employees are and who has what skills. Know what animals are on site and have that posted somewhere. It's very important for first responders to know what kind of situation they're getting into, especially if you're not on site. If you're away for the weekend and the neighbor calls in the fire for you, you won't be there to help that fire department assess those risks and to give them the peace of mind as far as what has to be removed or who is around. The other thing is very important is, as I said, assign responsibilities and roles. If there is a situation on our farm, we have the plan that I will attend the situation, where my wife will attend the roadside. She will wait at the roadside for the paramedics or the first aid responders and escort them directly to where they need to go. Very important to have those lanes mapped out. It's difficult for a fire engine to get to your barn if their axles are wrapped in electric wire trying to get into the field entrance. You also want to know how many animals are on site and where they're located, as well as where they're going to be moved to in case they do have to leave the barn. Do you have somebody that's going to handle those animals? Because if the barn's on fire and the animals are panicking, it's very unlikely that they'll leave on their own, despite the levels of dangers that are there. If it's after dark, an animal will not move from a light area to dark area willingly. And if you have people that are unfamiliar with handling those animals, doing what most people I've seen do and run around and scream and wave their arms and try to startle the animals, that's going to create an uncontrolled panic. And the last thing you want is to have first aid responders being stampeded by a herd of cattle.
Now, Ryan, a part of that response plan is going through, no different when we're in school. Remember we did the fire drill? we do the practice. So what should we do there for ourselves, our family, and the workers on the farm from a training perspective? Once again, trying to be proactive.
Well, it's great to bring up because it's very important to be proactive in these situations. Just because we think we know what we're going to do in a situation doesn't mean we're going to remember when that situation occurs. So doing dry runs, having written documentation, one of the best things for all the employees and every member on the farm is to have a written evacuation and emergency plan in all of their vehicles. So keep a personalized copy in everyone's vehicle. That way, regardless of whether they're on site or having to be called onto site, there is a well-defined list of the steps that need to be taken of where everybody has to go and whose responsibility is going to be what. You don't want everybody showing up to do the exact same thing and leaving 4 other things off that list untouched. And practice those dry runs for different times of the season. The layout and how things are in the summer are very different than how things are going to be in the winter. If everybody thinks everything is accessible and no one has plowed the driveways, having to wait that hour or two to get the driveway opened up to allow the fire truck back is just going to be toasting marshmallows at that point in time rather than actually putting out a fire. It's also very important that somebody on site has first aid training and is kept up to date. Despite how close you are, and making that phone call as well, have the person understand what information needs to be communicated. It's very easy to say there's a fire, I need help, but it's another story altogether to say there's a fire in our chemical storage area, we have pesticides on site and fumes. That's a vast difference between the equipment the fire departments have to show up with. Also, have things clearly marked on site for everybody to know where the fire extinguishers are, when the last time they were checked, where the first aid kits are as well. Who is going to move all the vehicles away from the barns. So the advanced training for the workers is extremely important. Do those dry runs. Make sure everybody's familiar with their roles.
Yeah, Ryan, the fire extinguisher one, cannot encourage people enough to make sure you're checking those. Because the worst thing that could happen, or there's a lot of bad stuff that can happen here, but one of the worst things that could happen is you see that fire extinguisher on the wall, you assume it works, and then you find out when you really do need it, when at that point in time that where I really got to pull it off the wall and I got to use it, it doesn't work because it's expired, it's faulty, it's been there since 1975. That is going to be a real unfortunate issue for you.
And unfortunately, it's one that we've encountered many times, especially for the fire extinguishers we keep in tractors. We oftentimes forget to check on those.
Yeah.
So it's very important. Check those fire extinguishers on a yearly basis for sure. You can always take them to the local fire department to be tested. The last thing you want to do is pull the pin to test it yourselves. That is going to adjust the fire extinguisher. You're going to need to get that fixed up. The other very important factor of the fire extinguishers is to make sure you have the right type. An AB extinguisher near the shop is not going to do any good if it's an electrical fire. You need to make sure you have the right fire extinguisher on hand. Most fire departments, you can take your fire extinguishers down there to be tested and checked on. And if it's been sitting there, as you said, for the last several years, chances are it's not going to work properly. And the last thing you want to be doing is standing in the middle of the barn fire thinking you've got things under control to pull that trigger and just have a little bit come out. You also need large enough ones. Know and understand how large a cubic area a fire extinguisher will affect.
Yeah, you made me think of another, just an example in terms of when you bring the fire department out and you show them around, do that tour and show them some of the infrastructure. If you do, that's a perfect time to mention, hey, we actually have an on-farm fire hydrant, and here's where it is. I heard a story on one farm where there was a building that burnt down, and then the fire department never accessed the fire hydrant because they didn't actually know it was there. And so that's another one of those things to keep in mind.
And having that site map, both given to the fire department prior, as well as having one available in a sealed container at the end of the driveway or outside of the barn itself. Don't have one inside the doorway of the barn because that's not going to do any good if things catch fire. But if you have a sealed site map with those responsibilities outlined, as well as a list of the number of animals and the number of employees you have on site, when those first responders come, they can grab that and know so much more about the situation than they would have if you were not there, especially if you were not there. And as you mentioned with the fire hydrants, I've unfortunately heard that more than once. Yeah. And the other thing being is where those hydrants are powered from. The first thing a lot of responders will do is shut down the power. And if you're not understanding what power supplies which buildings, it's not going to do any good.
Ryan, I'll tell you what, this is such an important topic. I really appreciate you not only sharing your own personal experience, but really helping everybody out here to be proactive and really prevent some situations from really impacting not only the family, but the farm business. So really do appreciate it. The Farm Safety Roundup is brought to you by Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. For practical, actionable tools and resources, including a family farm safety checklist, go to wsps.ca/farm safety. Ryan, thanks for joining us here today for the Farm Safety Roundup.
Thanks for having me, Shaun.
With agricultural expertise to help keep farmers, their families, and their workers safe, Farm Safety Roundup is a podcast series produced by Real Agriculture with the team of ag specialists at Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. Go to the website wsps.ca/farm safety. There you're going to find free health and safety resources, and you also be able to check this episode's show notes for information on the topics discussed. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time to talk all things farm safety right here on the Farm Safety Roundup.